Good morning, everyone. These are difficult times for Ukraine and the entire world, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on that's not really in the mainstream media, but I really want to get to how it's going to affect markets and how it's going to impact your investment portfolio, because there is going to be ongoing major significant impact. Remember at the very beginning I was putting out reports saying everyone thinks there won't be a war. Yes, there was a war. We thought there would be. We explained the Russian point of view so that people in advance could understand why war was likely. And it has happened. And the response of the West, though, is ratcheting up to a magnificent degree, some would call it. But I have to stress again, it is dangerous to corner a wild animal. A cornered animal is very dangerous indeed. The West needs to respond massively against this, but also for countries like Australia, we could perhaps focus on our humanitarian efforts to help refugees at the border, as plenty of other nations are getting involved in terms of supply of military equipment, etc. But what this means for markets is that the Federal Reserve will not be raising interest rates at its next meeting, and do not take that as a reason to buy stocks. For many months now, in fact, since the middle of last year, I've been suggesting be careful of the stock rally. Then in the first week of January, I said it could be the high for the year. I was already bearish stocks. The Ukrainian situation makes the outlook for stocks far worse. Anyone who thinks you should buy stocks on the dip, that this will be over soon and it's not a problem and it's in another part of the world from the US stock market, think again. Flow-through effects are going to be significant and ongoing. The Fed is not going to raise rates at the next meeting, and I've been the world's biggest hawk on the Fed, saying they should raise rates massively. I now have radically changed that forecast to no rate hike at the next meeting. They'll want to see how the situation with Ukraine unfolds. I guess there is a chance they could do it, but they should already be at 1.5% instead of 0.1, and they've missed that period of time when they should have been doing that. But I do not see it as a bullish equity scenario. As I was about to say, I've been saying for some time, sell stocks, buy gold, buy the US dollar. Yes, gold and US dollar are both buys. They are both safe haven trades. I'm not sure the US dollar is a safe haven trade, but the rest of the world thinks it is, and that's why it will be and have that response. The euro is going to be continue to be sold. The European response has become far more warlike than I anticipated towards this, and that warlike response has now, in the last few hours, you may not have heard this, prompted Russia to activate its strategic defense forces across the country. What that means is it's a heightened alert for their nuclear weapons. It's a heightened alert for their conventional weapons that can reach well into Europe. The reason they have done this is if NATO wants to now start pouring tanks and heavy weaponry into Ukraine to make it an even more intense, long-lasting conflict, albeit to defend the Ukrainian people, then Russia is seeing that it has the right, that if there's a train full of tanks crossing Poland perhaps, or Czechoslovakia on its way to Ukraine, that is a military act of war against Russia. It has the right with a missile to take that train out. So this heightens the risk of the war becoming worse than it would have been, and it is a tragedy, and we do need to react against Russia, but an overreaction against Russia means Putin will also be tempted to turn off the pipeline. I mean, everyone's talking about how Russia has stopped a pipeline. That pipeline hadn't even begun to function yet, so they're simply saying they're not going to agree to it starting, but they haven't turned off the pipeline that supplies 30-40% of Germany's energy needs. If Putin feels threatened, if Russia feels threatened, and remember before this, something like 68% and higher of the Russian people were in favor of action, if Putin and Russia feel threatened enough, they will turn off that pipeline, and the heightened risk of military interaction directly between Russia and NATO reaches really dangerous levels. So this is not over. This is the worst possible scenario. In fact, I'd considered what I thought was the worst possible scenario, which was a Russian takeover of Ukraine. relatively quickly, in a week to 10 days. It's looking more like an ongoing struggle, although it is clear the reason Russian forces haven't taken Kiev and other major cities is they have not committed themselves fully to doing so, because Putin is aware that committing fully, then militarily Russia can take Kiev. But they actually don't want, and people want to demonize them, but they actually don't want a high civilian casualty rate, which is what will happen now that they're all motivated to go out in the streets and throw Molotov cocktails at tanks. I don't think it's going to do those individuals any good at all to do that, but I understand the motivation behind it. What I'm saying is we're in a difficult phase now, because if NATO is going to push weaponry into Ukraine, then Putin has to decide whether he goes really, really hard now, and that could lead to very high civilian casualty rates. So we're in a very difficult, dangerous period over the next few days, the next week, the next 2 weeks. Russia is feeling now that there is an overreaction from the West. I'm not saying it is, but Russia is feeling that. So now Russia's prepared to heighten the stakes as well. And that's what I said a week ago when I said it's important that the West respond, but if it corners Russia too harshly, then the stakes will go up. And that is exactly what we're starting to see. In my mind, markets should be gapping lower. Whatever they're actually doing at the moment, I would be a seller of the rally of equity markets. A lot of people will be going, some clever argument about how war is good for stocks. Forget that. Because Europe is now going into recession. There is no doubt about it. Europe is going into recession. Remember, all these sanctions and trade embargoes, they hurt Europe as well as Russia. They reduce business activity in Europe. And of course, in Europe, they will try to find other means of satisfying those needs, as will Russia, probably with China. But we're creating now, the world has forever changed. We're creating two power blocks now, US, NATO, Russia, China, two intense power blocks, as opposed to the don't like each other totally, but we're having full dialogue, we're traveling, we're visiting each other. That's now shifting in a very significant way. The world is not going back to how we knew it. And we can blame Putin, but he was a bear that was poked by NATO. So both things are true. Putin's in the wrong, but at the same time, NATO really did push up on Russia too hard, perhaps. So there is a little bit of an argument on both sides. I am not endorsing Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I'm saying there are real reasons for it, and it still shouldn't have happened. But I don't like that people are saying, he's just decided, Anyway, I won't go into that. I'm sorry for that. To the people of Ukraine, the whole world is there for you. I hope Australia really steps up, stops thinking about who they're going to sanction, because none of those Russian leaders are coming to Australia anyway. So I'm not sure what we're achieving there, but it's nice, it's symbolic. But I really hope Australia, for the Ukrainian people, steps up to the plate and puts 100% of its energy in providing support for Ukrainian refugees, and forget about all the other political grandstanding stuff. That's what I'd like to see happen. If you're trading markets, do look to get out of equities on any rally, because the market did rally over Thursday, Friday. It thought the war would be short, it would be over, it would be localized. Over the weekend, the situation has deteriorated terribly, militarily, diplomatically, politically, and in terms of the ramping up, NATO ramping up its battle response battalions, moving them to the Russian border, Russia now switching on its strategic alert, which includes both conventional and nuclear weapons. Things are way too hot. We should not have got to this point. Clifford Bennett, Chief Economist, ACY Securities. Thank you very much.